First off, just a bit of an introduction as to why I'm making this video. So I took delivery of this Raider Boats 280 Offshore behind me late last summer. We picked it up out in Colville, drove it home to Minnesota, where primarily I'm using it out on Lake Superior, although I do take a few trips with it each year, or will be taking over to Lake Michigan a few times each season. You know, although welded aluminum Pilothouse boats are pretty much everywhere out in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska, they're really just now starting to catch on out here in the Great Lakes. You know, for sure, I'm starting to see an increasing number of Hughes crafts, Kingfishers, much more so now than even just a few years ago. And there's definitely a few more dealers of those brands starting to pop up out here in the upper Midwest. Raiders, however, are still pretty much a rarity out in this neck of the woods. I kind of joke that one of the things I absolutely hate about the new Offshore is that it takes me 3 times as long to launch or load the boat at the ramp than my old Grady White. You know, that's because everybody wants to come by and chit-chat about the boat. It's certainly a fun problem to have, but it speaks to the point that Raiders, you just don't see too many Raiders yet anyway out here on the Great Lakes. Therefore, over this past winter, I've been getting a bunch of phone calls, Facebook messages, emails from guys that I've either met at the ramp, other Great Lakes anglers shopping for their next boat, or guys that are actually in the process of working with Raider at Selkirk on the details of their own build. And what I found from getting and answering a lot of the questions I've received is that they're often the exact same questions that I had when I was going through the same process a couple years ago, working out the details on my own build. You know, although we're both largely fishing for some of the same species, we do tend to fish a little bit differently out here in the Great Lakes, and accordingly, we tend to rig our boats a little bit differently as well. So in the end, I wanted to make this video to point out some of the custom features that Raider and Selkirk did for me, as well as some additional minor tweaks and modifications that I've now made on my own after having a half season or so of use of it out on the water. You know, once again, I'm not going to walk around the entire boat. You know, Justin and Kylo at Selkirk Marine, they do a great job on their YouTube site walking around pretty much all of their models, pointing out all the different features. So I'm not going to take the time to do that. It'd be largely repetitive. I'm just going to concentrate on some of the few custom tweaks, modifications, things that Selkirk did on my particular build, to try and customize the boat to my needs, as much as possible. One thing I wanted to be able to do with this boat was from time to time knock off the trolling program and be able to spot lock over submerged reefs for deep lake trout, late summer, early fall, something I wasn't able to really do on my last boat. So in talking to Jonathan Lawrence and Justin, their recommendation was to go with this MinnKota. It's a MinnKota Instinct Quest 100-inch shaft. I think it was new last year, and they both said it would work out well on an offshore. So that's what we went with. Raider did a nice job of fabricating a little bowsprit extension there to mount it to. I actually had them mounted on a removable bracket. That way, early season or on my Lake Michigan trips, when I'm not planning on jigging, I can actually remove the motor. I don't need the weight. I don't need to be trucking it down the interstate if I don't plan on using it. So I mounted it up there, put in a 36-volt lithium battery up under the V-berth for me, and I did get a chance to use it a few times late last season, and did a great job. It held me in position. I didn't get a chance to use it in too huge of waves, but under normal conditions, I had plenty of juice to keep me spot locked for vertical jigging. One of my other requests for this boat was to ensure sufficient maneuverability around the dock. I'll be taking this boat out to Isle Royale National Park a few times each summer. Pretty remote, a lot of small docks in rough shape, a lot of them unprotected, a lot of boat traffic. So sometimes you gotta get a little creative when finding a place to dock your boat. And I find a lot of times I gotta park on the inside of a T-dock pretty close to shore. You might only have a couple feet of clearance before you're up on the rocks. My home marina is pretty small, pretty narrow slipways between the docks, barely a boat length wide. Pretty rough approach to the fuel dock due to not a whole lot of dredging going on. So I had a bow thruster in my old Grady, and that actually was a lifesaver a couple times. Made things so much easier, and that was a much heavier fiberglass boat. They got blown around on the wind a bit, even without the canvas up. So now with a much lighter aluminum boat, all of the sail area, the Pilothouse, that was one thing I wanted to make sure they put in for me, was a bow thruster, just for that added flexibility and ease of maneuverability. It's something they said they hadn't actually done before, but discussing it with them, they said they'd figure out a way to do it, and sure enough, Raider did a great job. They got one in there for me. So there it is. I forget the exact thrust rating, but it is a 12-volt bow thruster. Their welders, Craftsman did a great job of welding kind of this fairing on the leading edge, same as they put in fiberglass boats. That way, going through the water up on plane on a nice calm day, the water just goes zipping right by. No rattles, no hums, no whistles. You don't know the bow thruster's there. Occasionally in a little rougher seas, if I come down the backside of the wave, as the bow comes down, sometimes you get a little bit of water forced up in there. You might get a little bit of a squeak or a squeal very momentarily because of that. But again, it's very momentary. Doesn't really bother me at all. And again, only in rougher seas. And again, so far, moving around some tight docks, it's proved very useful. I'll show you once we get up in the cabin where they mounted the controls for it. But again, another instance, Raider Selkirk listened to what I was looking for on the boat, and even though they hadn't done it before, they figured out a way to do it. And actually turns out a couple of guys I've talked to since over the winter, now they're considering having Raider put one in their boats. So that's about it for the exterior of the boat. Pretty much everything else, option-wise, is pretty common or standard. I'm not going to cover any of that, so we'll hop up here in the cockpit. Very standard, Raider aft steering station. As I mentioned, there's the aft joystick style control for the bow thruster. I'll say I've never had a boat with an aft steering station before. I fish a lot solo, in single hand. It's so nice coming into the dock, being at this aft station. I can have a spring line in hand, get up close to the dock, tie off the spring line, give it a little bump, little jab of thruster if needed. Makes docking so nice when I'm out here by myself, as opposed to my old boat where I had to run back and forth from the helm with to get the dock lines on. So absolutely loving the aft steering station. As far as rigging the aft deck for fishing, pretty common out here on the Great Lakes. I think it's catching on elsewhere, but instead of rails, went with a 4-foot section of track on each side. Have my side riggers mounted there, a few rod holders. I like it. It's very versatile and customizable. Early season when I'm not running my side riggers, I can take those off, just get them out of the way, mount more or fewer rod holders as necessary. So run all my dipsies out of here, occasional planer board line. A lot of guys on the Great Lakes, they'll run a 3 or 4 rod tree for their planer board lines off of the track section. I considered doing that in this boat, but again, I wanted to try and keep things spread out as tangle free as possible, so I didn't go with that, because one of the things Raider does that I really like is they always, in all of their Pilothouse boats, I believe, mount this post welded on the cabin. And what they typically do, they'll mount their own 3 welded on rod holders, kind of at an angle there. That way you can use it for additional exterior rod storage, which I didn't really need. I went with the 12 rod rocket launcher, so I got plenty of exterior rod storage. So in my case, I had to mount the post to the cabin, but in the end I had them not mount their own welded on rod holders. I just kept it empty. So what I did then is I brought these clamp on rod holders over off my old boat, and that's what I use to run my board lines. So these are Fish On Sports clamp on rod holders. They're out of Michigan, so it's real nice. And I'm running, for all my board lines, can just pop them out, run my board lines there. I have an additional net holder there, so I can keep a net readily accessible on each side. Then obviously done fishing, and just fold them all in. And then you notice, they're well within the plane of the gunnel there, so they're completely out of the way for docking. So that way, all my board lines are up there, keeps the gunnels free for my dipsies and downriggers. It's been working out very well. And again, obviously, did the same thing over on this side. Another kind of custom thing back here on the back deck. I had this on my last boat, and I made sure they did it on this one. I had the Selkirk guys mount an additional 7-inch Garmin back here. What I love about it is, most of the time, standing back here, fishing by the aft station, watching my spread, but it's very nice. You know, if I'm working my stern riggers, keeping, you know, working tight to a reef on the bottom, you know, rigger balls 2, 3, 4 feet off the bottom over a, you know, reef. I got panoptics up on that Garmin, so just without even turning around, I can tell, you know, bottom comes up, comes down. I can be right on the riggers, minimize the risk of bouncing bottom or tangling up without, you know, having to continuously, you know, turn around and check out the Garmin there at the aft station. So, you know, again, had this kind of setup on my last boat, and I absolutely love it. So that's one thing I made sure they did for me, you know, on this one as well. You know, kicker back there, I had a couple questions about that. It ended up being a 20 horse kicker. I think the original spec was for a 15. They had a little problem sourcing it, so they were able to get a 20. That has been more than enough for trolling for me. I think one option was a 25. I did not want a 25 because I planned to do a remote throttle, and I know most of those remote throttle brands don't have a fitment kit for anything more than a 20 horse. So I wanted to limit it to a 20 horse kicker. Does great for me, even to, you know, couple foot waves. Gets really gusty, then obviously I can fire up the mains and use the troll mode on the main Suzukis. But for a guy that trolls 8 hours a day, I know there's some debate over a kicker or not, but for me, I'd rather put those 8 hours a day, you know, on a $3,000 kicker than a $30,000 main. So 20 horse has been, for this 280 offshore, has been more than sufficient for me. I mentioned a little bit earlier, I plan to be taking this boat out to Isle Royale National Park. So very remote, access to shore power is pretty non-existent. Not a lot of access, convenient access to gas anyway. So I wanted to be able to get out there on 4 to 5 day, pretty much remote trips. That means I wanted sufficient battery capacity to do so. One of the things I asked Raider and Selkirk about doing for me in that case was to put in a high capacity lithium setup from a house battery. And that was something they weren't really comfortable doing. It didn't sound like, I don't know if it's just because they didn't typically do it, but their recommendation instead was to go with 2 Group 31 100 amp hour AGMs. I was a little skeptical that would be enough, but I agreed to give it a shot. So that's what they put in for me. First half season of use, my suspicions were correct. That just isn't quite enough. You know, like most Great Lakes guys, you know, I'm going to launch from the ramp or leave my marina. I'm going to run maybe 5 to 10 miles, troll on a kicker all day, which is only putting out, what, 5-6 amps, you know, even if I was, you know, going max throttle on it, which I'm not. So 8 hours on that, you know, when you're working 4 downriggers, the panoptics, you know, all the electronics, you got power hungry, you know, hydraulic autopilot on a rough day, working back and forth all day. And I found in the end I could get maybe 10 to 12 hours of fishing on those AGMs before I really needed to get back to the dock and have a good solid charge. So obviously that was not going to cut it on these remote Isle Royale trips. So accordingly, in the off season, I ended up doing my own conversion over to lithium, set up here for my house battery. So under the battery cabinet here, my original Group 31 AGMs were side by side down there, mounted fore and aft. I'd really hoped to be able to get 2 300 amp hour lithiums in there. They were just a bit too big, wouldn't fit. So in the end, went with an Epic battery, 460 amp hour, fit in there real nicely. Not a problem at all. Obviously, in doing so now, I couldn't charge it directly off the Suzuki alternators. I had to go with a couple of DC to DC chargers. So went with Victron Orion XS chargers. You know, one of them you can't see, it's behind the main battery there. Second one ended up going down in here. 50 amp charger. I have it dialed back via the app to 30 amps just to not overtax the Suzuki alternators. But yeah, those are set up to only work when the main motors are running. So those are both wired into my 2 start batteries and should provide a decent amount of charge to the lithiums when I am running the mains. One of the other things I asked Selkirk about is, you know, now that I got this Pilothouse and all the real estate up there, you know, I asked them would they be able to do solar panels for me, because that would help my battery capacity situation on these long remote trips. And again, that was something they said they'd never done before. I think they were a little leery to do it, and in the end they didn't want to do that on this build for me, which is fine. I can understand that, probably not wanting to warranty something that I had never done before. So in the end, that was another thing I did this off season. We'll climb up here. So up top here on the Pilothouse roof, mounted two semi-rigid flexible 200 watt solar panels, so a total of 400 watts of solar. Ended up being kind of an industrial adhesive, no drill mounting. I did, just to be safe, put a little bit of vinyl tape around the leading edges there, just in case ripping down the highway, nothing's tempted to come up and flap in the wind. Probably overkill, but the positive, negative DC cables there run down into the cabin via the headliner through a couple clamshells. And then one other thing I did, since I had the headliner in the cabin off for that, Starlink Minis were on sale, Black Friday deal, so probably a little bit superfluous, but picked up a Starlink Mini, wired it up since I had the headliner down there off anyway. Not sure how much I'll end up using it, but again, some of these remote isle world trips, a couple of the outer islands down the Apostle Islands, you don't have cell coverage, so it will be nice to be able to get online, check weather, send the occasional text, voice call, what have you. So again, probably didn't need to do that, but again, they were on sale while I was doing wiring up in the cabin anyway. Figured I'd make the addition. Obviously now with the changeover to lithium and the new solar panels, I had to do a little bit of electrical work inside the boat as well to connect everything. So I took advantage of all the tons of space that is located in these offshores behind the galley, back by where the original factory installed guest 3-bank charger is. So mounted a new bracket there. That's where I put the solar charger for the solar panels. Produces best case 30 amps of charge. I had to do a separate dedicated lithium capable 15 amp battery charger for the new lithium bank. You know, and since I had this extra AGM battery that I just took out, decided I'd throw that in there. There was plenty of space, and then so I put that in there, and now that is also hooked up to my autopilot with a selector switch, so I can select which battery or bank of batteries powers my autopilot. So that gives me now, in addition to the 460 amp hour new lithium, I've got this separate 100 amp hour battery that gives me a couple extra days, hopefully, of fishing time on that autopilot. All right, so we've pulled the boat outside on a sunny day, albeit it is March in Minnesota, so it's not a hot sun, but we'll check out what I've drawn from the solar panels installed, connected to the Victron Smart Solar app. Right now I've got the main breaker off. See, we're pulling nothing, 13.2 volts on the house battery. So we'll go down here. I'm gonna flip the breaker on for the main solar and see what we get here. Looks like we're drawing 230, 240 watts. It's putting out about 18 to 20 volts at 9 amps, and the current chart out of the charger into my house bank looks like 15 amps at 14 volts. So, well, that's good. This was the first test of the new solar panel, so I guess that means I wired everything up correctly. So, yeah, hoping I did kind of the online assessment for northern Minnesota in the summer, what I could expect out of a decent, an average day of sun up north during fishing season. It said theoretically I could put 100 to 150 amp hours back into my house battery every day. So if that's the case, I should be able to not quite replace what I use every day in a day of fishing, especially if the autopilot's working hard, but certainly much more than I'd get trolling on the kicker all day, and should allow me on a full day of charge to stay charged up halfway decently on my long rural trips. So that's really about it for outside the boat and the cockpit. We'll pop inside the cabin here. Rod storage was a huge concern of mine. ideally, between mono rods, my braid dipsies, wire dipsies, lead core, copper rods, SWR2, and maybe even a couple jigging rods. I really would like, I really wanted the ability to store 20 to maybe even up to 25 rods easily accessible in semi-rig. So I did have Selkirk at the factory. I had them do their pretty standard 4x4 taco rod holders, one on either side of the Pilothouse there in the ceiling. And then what I did once I got the boat home was I got a couple additional taco 2x2 rod holders, mounted those right up the center line there of the walkway. And I just keep for the most part my mono rods here, so it's only size 20, size 30 reels. They don't stick down too far. I'm 6 foot, so I can still walk down the aisle here without clocking my head. So that's gotten me now the ability to do 12 rods in the overhead, and then for the rest of them, and we'll pop down here into the V-berth area. So on the V-berth on the roof, I got another set of track style rod holders, and that gives me the capability of storing another 9 rods of thwart ships here. They do have to be broken down in half, but I can still for the most part leave them rigged, and that way now that gives me the 12 out there, the 9 in here. I got the capacity for storing 21 rods semi-rigged before I have to worry about throwing anything down on the cushion. So for the most part my cushions stay clear for storing other things and or sleeping. I mentioned the bow mount trolling motor, so the battery for that is under this panel, lift up panel there in the forward V-berth. It's got its own 36 volt lithium chargers dedicated solely for that trolling motor battery. Guys at Selkirk just kind of, instead of wiring it hard to the boat, they left the cord here wrapped around a cleat. So when I do need to charge it up, and I don't use it often, but when I do need to charge it, I can just uncoil the cord. I can plug it in here to the AC outlet on shore power, right there by the helm to top it off. And then obviously when I don't need it, otherwise it just stays all nice and wrapped up out of the way down there. And the only other thing down here, since we're here, that is where the bow thruster went. So the bow thruster motor, you can see the through-hole tube down there. Might be a little bit dark, but again, it's a 12 volt thruster, and then that is wired back to my house battery. I think that's pretty much it down here. As far as the helm area goes, pretty standard, nothing too unique. I did have them put my fish hawk up here. Here is the main cabin controller for my bow thruster. Had them do a nice low profile one as opposed to the normal joystick style. That way, if I'm here actuating the throttles, I'm not wrapping my knuckles against it, but it's still right there for easy access. I did mention I did do a remote throttle for my kicker. On this boat, I went with the Trollmaster Pro Angler wireless. I did have an iTroll system on my old boat. Great units, very well built. What I didn't want on this boat, that control box is corded. So that meant I pretty much had to put the main control box at one helm or the other. They do now make a small wireless key fob remote, I believe, with their G3 units, but it's a pretty small remote. I was a little afraid I was going to, lose it or put it in a pocket and end up running it through the laundry. And in the end, I found that on that iTroll, I wasn't really using all the features on it that I paid for. I was pretty much using it just as a basic remote throttle. So in this boat, made a change. I went with the Trollmaster. Again, nice large remote. Got a cradle for it. Got a cradle for it up here. Got an identical cradle for it at the aft helm. And then again, it's big enough. It's nice. I can take it back if I'm out here by myself. I need to take it out to the back deck, put it down the transom fish box there, and speed up or slow down, cut the idle to net a fish if I need to when I'm out here by myself. While we're in here, I just mentioned one of the main selling points for me with Raider over some other brands as far as fishability. You know, if you go with a stand-up head, and a lot of builders, you know, their head is enclosed in, you know, a full bulkhead with maybe you've got a small window, but a lot of them you don't have any windows at all. So if you're sitting here trying to fish, you know, you got a pilot house boat for a reason, even though most of the time out on the back deck. I mean, sometimes you just want to get in here out of the cold and the wind and the rain. And so I found, you know, a lot of those builders expected that if I was in here fishing, you know, that bulkhead, you know, limits your visibility of almost half of your spread if you're trying to fish from in here. So what I liked about the Raider was all the glass that they put in. You know, so you can sit here at the helm, you know, you got all the glass there, you can see straight through to the back deck. You know, not great for privacy, but that's why they got the drop curtains if you want them. But you know, I can sit here at the helm, see straight through that bulkhead, and I can pretty much keep an eye on my entire spread for those days that I'm fishing inside the cabin. So that really was a big plus that kind of converted me over to Raider. Another important item for me was storage, how everything's laid out. A little bit of a neat freak. So one of the things I actually saw from one of Jonathan Lawrence's demonstrator boats, he did a video on this a couple years ago. Instead of doing another set of just kind of general open base storage areas like under the dinette, what he did, and I had him do in my boat, is under the helm seats, put in these two drawers. And these are nice, big, you know, huge drawers. You know, they got, you know, one on each side, and this way they've been great. So that way, you know, I'm out fishing in the swells, I'm not down on my knees fishing around in the dark for what I'm looking for. The drawers, pull it out and it's right there for me. I think it's really going to be a popular option once kind of the word gets out on them that they do. And again, there's still just general, plenty of just general open bay storage there under the two dinette seats. Other thing that I think on these offshores, you know, there is just so much room in the galley area, especially if you don't put a refrigerator in, which I didn't want. I told Raider and Selkirk I wanted to use that space for tackle storage. So again, nice thing about Raider, they do all their own in-house, you know, starboard work to do their own custom cabinetry. So what I had them do is they did two tackle storage cabinets for me, actually this size, take advantage of that space. So, you know, decent tackle storage room for a couple of planos, three pull-out drawers, you know, for other items, you know, loose gear. So that worked out, you know. Again, you know, that was nice. They did two of them, but again, you know, I didn't want a stove in this boat, so that left me still with all this space up here that I still felt was a little bit underutilized. You know, I couldn't go any taller here because of the sink, but what I ended up doing in the off season is I ended up taking out this second one of these that they built, and I had the guys out east at Boat Outfitters actually manufacture me a larger tackle cabinet. Again, that is enough to fit all the rest of my planos. You know, I can get about a half dozen large planos in here, a couple of smaller ones. You know, all of my, you know, coho flies, you know, regular flies, spinning glows. I've got all those on Fish Eng foam boards, which fit nicely in those cubbies. And that way now, pretty much all of my regularly used tackle, with the exception of maybe my spoon box, which lives out under the aft steering station, is right here in one of these two cabinets, ready for easy access. And then the stuff I don't utilize a lot is in a tackle bag down in the in-floor storage, which I'm really not going to cover because that's been done. I think that is about it. You know, I'll finish up with, you know, one of the questions I do get asked a lot of times is, okay, well, what about the Raider do you not like? I gotta admit, there's very few things, but you know, no boat is 100% perfect. So there are a couple items that maybe I'd reconsider, or maybe in hindsight, perhaps I'd ask Raider about, you know, when I was going through the build process. You know, one of them is, you know, this fish box. It is absolutely massive, and you know, but for the Great Lakes, you know, I'm never going to need to stuff the thing full of tuna. So honestly, a fish box probably half this size would be plenty for a few limits of coho and some kings. So I guess in hindsight, one of the things perhaps I would have asked is, instead of going with the single large fish box, could they have done two smaller, you know, saddle style fish boxes, you know, along the edges, which I've seen in some subsequent videos of this model year. I think they're starting to do that for some people that want that. So what I was thinking was, the standard fuel capacity on this Offshore is 160 gallons. I really would have liked to get to 190 gallons again for my long Isle Royal trips. So I'm kind of wondering in hindsight if I could have asked them to maybe cut down the size of that fish box a little bit, or gone with saddle boxes, and then maybe extend the fuel tank aft to fit that last 30 gallons in. Again, not a showstopper. Just something I've had time to think about. I think my plan is I've got the hold downs there on the deck, so I'm just going to get a fuel bladder if I need to, and I'll use that for an extra 30 to 50 gallons to get me out to the island, and I can always top off when I get out there. Other thing, I absolutely love the sliding Pilothouse door. It's got this little pin here, to keep it from slamming shut. But I do notice that, in the wind and the swells and the waves, there's some play in it, so it's rocking back and forth. And I have seen, some guys have actually broken off that little pin because of it. So I ended up fixing that issue myself. Just a little piece of fuel hose that I slit down the middle, and jammed up in there to kind of act as a little bumper now. Now I can latch that door and it's not going anywhere. So that's one thing I think Raider could do a little bit better. I think they need to find a way to mount some kind of rubber stop up there to keep that door from moving around. And then really the last thing is probably just the aft transom door. I really wish the aft transom door opened in instead of out. I've got to get out on the transom a fair amount, to keep a big king out of the riggers, a big lake trout. And they get to the boat, they see the boat, they dive straight down. So might need to get out there, get a line out from between our boaters from a big laker, hand lining the last little bit of a dipsy close to the boat. So I'm out on the transom, a fair amount. And with this door opening out, you notice, only opens so far, it hits the hose for the motor. So in order to get across the transom, now I either need to, figure out a way to step up over across, or, I got to come out here to the very edge there and shut the door before I can, get out here to deal with an unruly king. So not a fan, fine in calm weather, a little bit of a challenge in swells or single-handed. Honestly, I probably wouldn't do it single-handed just because, pretty big risk of falling overboard. So again, if it were up to me, I would have had this door, open inward. Probably means rethinking how they do the battery compartment, or the battery switch compartment. But I know why they did it. I mean, the way this door is designed, got the flange there to keep water from coming in. But again, just from an ease of use standpoint, I really do wish they'd figure out a way for that door to open in. But really, other than that, that is about it that I've found so far for my half season of use on this boat. Otherwise, it's done everything I've asked it to do and more. They did a great job with it. I love the boat, and so hopefully this video shed a little bit of light on how I rigged my Raider for the Great Lakes. Maybe answered some of the common questions that I've been getting, and maybe give guys a few ideas for their own Raider builds, or even their own general welded aluminum build. So appreciate it. Thanks for watching.